Yes, it's felt like an eternity, but here we are finally with the room statistics video. Some key things to mention here. I'm going to go over the cons and pros, where I guess the controls I had. So some of the negatives were I didn't exactly get the fair share of dungeons across, which means I didn't do, like 5 weld, 5 ruins, 5 warrens, 5 cove, all that yada yada yada. I also have DLC on, which you may not if you're watching this video, so I do have a couple of districts you will not have, which will increase my ability to get more loot, and also to finish the dungeon quicker and probably heal more, so some of my times will be reduced compared to yours. However, I do believe that the general idea will stay true. You just may not be getting as much. It might take a little longer time because you don't have to, just little bits of benefits helping you out along the way. I also geared towards the dungeon, which means medium to long. I did try to focus more on scouting, and in the short I did try to focus on obviously DPS, get through the rooms quicker. I also did not detour. I tried to finish the dungeon as quickly as possible, therefore I could have left extra loot behind and also extra fights. Two last controls I had, everything was champion level, none of this is apprentice or veteran, hence loot and money will be different and enemies will face. And also, I did not have any walking mods on or any mods in general, therefore if you do have walking mods, some rooms may be significantly faster and may actually change the way these statistics look. For example, if you have a walking mod on a long dungeon, you'd be able to walk to rooms much faster than I was able to do. And one last thing is, I did 5 of every type of dungeon. Those will be where I'm getting my numbers from. So I did 5 short explore, 5 short battle, 5 of each medium, objective, explored, and battle, and then I did 5 of each long, which is battle and explore, and I try to diversify the dungeons to get a more accurate representation of time. With that being prefaced, enjoy. Short dungeon statistics. First, we're going to start off with short percent of tiles explored. Now, what does this mean? Let me go through the numbers first, then I'll kind of tell you what this means. So for explored rooms, it was an average of 80%. So what this means is if you had 50 tiles, which is way too many probably for a short room, but I'm not sure off the top of my head, that means you had to probably on average explore 40 of those pathway tiles. So that's a lot of exploring to do when we compared that to the battle room. The high percentage means the highest I had to explore was 88%, I never had to explore 100%, and the low was 70. As you can see, with the low is 70, that's pretty darn close to the average, obviously, therefore you're most likely going to be 80% every time, which means you're going to be walking significantly farther, and eventually we will see more rooms as well, which is something to factor when you do your dungeon runs. For battle, we have an average of 61%, so that same 50 is now almost 30 tiles, so you're walking 10 less tiles, and you go, oh wow, 10 less tiles. Well, that's a possibility of a couple extra less fights, a couple less traps. Now you can argue that's also a couple less curios, so if you're doing this for money, which we'll look at, we'll kind of gauge whether that's better or worse. A high of 84%, which is almost exactly like explored. Obviously, battle rooms will be much more susceptible to having a 100%, because if it's at the very end and your dungeon is in a straight line, you're going to have to do it. As an explored room would end one room early, that would be the only times these are really different, and we will look at times later in the video. Here's the amazing thing. We have a low of 32%. That's like a couple of rooms explored and that dungeon is over. So there's much more benefits to maybe doing short battle, because you have a chance to end that dungeon very quickly, which makes it a very appealing case for resolve, which we will look at later. So keep these in your head. This is kind of an oddball statistic, but it is very telling of the things to come. Now that we looked at the path tiles, let's actually look at the time. All of this will be in minutes, so 9.6 minutes, 10.7 minutes, yada yada yada. So an average of almost 10 minutes, 9.6 for explored. That's quite a big difference when you compare that to the battle room, which is 7.3. Off the top of my head, I think that's about a 25% difference. 25% difference, that's a pretty big time cost. Now if you go to the highs, they're very comparable actually, 10.7 to 11.2. So you might be walking longer, because once again you might be reaching those rooms where you have to go the whole way. For battle rooms where you might have to do a lot of backtracking, which is not very good, while the Explorer is going to keep a very similar pace. And then as you can see, the lows for both, 7.6 to 3.5, that's literally half. you can do the shortest, at least in this statistical value, and I do believe for most, you can half the lowest of an explored room with the battle room, because there's always that possibility of only taking a fight or two and they're right beside each other. It could end very quickly. And the reason why the low on the explored room really can't get much lower is because you have to walk the tiles. Remember, we have to walk 80% to usually a 60%. So as you can see, it's just going to take on average longer to walk those and possibly take more fights. Number of fights. What's intriguing is, and maybe it's RNG and it's a small sample size, it is only 5 of each, you actually take one more whole fight in explored rooms, and this might be because you're walking through hallways, and scouting doesn't necessarily help you as much in a small explorer room as it does in a small battle room, because you can avoid certain rooms for battle rooms and just take the battle rooms and be done, while explored you still gotta check off all those boxes, which means you might have to take an extra fight or two in the hallway. Now they both have a high of 5, which is about the highest extent I ever saw, obviously, but most rooms were obviously between 3 and 4 fights. Explored's looking more for a 4.6, and it looks like I took more 5 fights than I did 4. Now here's the other cool thing. Both have a high of 5, but as you can see, between those averages, one whole fight and the low for explored was 4, while the low for battle was only 2. That's pretty significant. That means there's a possibility of only taking 2 fights, finishing the dungeon quicker, and exploring less tiles. And we're going to see what this does to GPM, gold earned, and other stats. Now, room total. These are not the rooms I explored. These are just the amount of rooms that were spawned in the dungeon. So there was on average 8.2, a high of 9, low of 8. There was 4 8s, 1 9. That's how you get 8.2. And then for the battle, there was a high of 8 and a low of 6. So there's actually a rather big diversity right there. There can possibly 6, 7, 8, at least based on the 5 dungeons I went in. So if you get a dungeon room with only 6 rooms and you get an explorer, you could potentially finish that dungeon very quickly if there's not that many battle rooms. Which is why battle rooms, I think, are just so much quicker. In a short term, remember we're only talking about short, we will get to long eventually, but for short dungeons, I think battle rooms are beginning to look more appealing if you want a quicker dungeon. So this is what we want to do. This is where we want to put our mouth at. Where's the money? Surprisingly, it's a 55 gold difference. That's it, 55. High of 14,335 and a high of 18,725 on battle. So not only is the average close to the same, the higher is 4 grand above, but we do have to go to low. And as you can see, if you finish that battle room within one fight, you're only expecting about 8 grand compared to the low of almost $13,000. We are talking a 4,500 gold difference between the low of battle and low explored, and these will have certain ramifications of why we might do a short battle compared to a short explorer. But this is very interesting because if you really depend on your weeks, both can have very good options, but battle can be a little riskier if you really want to stack up because you might get one of those low ones where you don't take a lot of fights. Now GPM, gold per minute, averages 400. The battle room clears the average explored. We're looking at an average of 1439 explored and 1874 on battle. That is crazy. We have a high of only 1700 compared to the 2700 of battle. That's an insane GPM. And the reason why that probably is you can take the couple of fights you need to and then you can back right out. Because remember, we have less rooms to search. We have less tiles to walk. Therefore, we are going to get a higher GPM. So if you just want to mass replicate a dungeon for the highest GPM, right now short battle's looking very appealing at almost 3,000. Even the low is still 1,200, which is compared to the lowest explored. I think in terms of GPM, if you don't need to worry about weeks passing by, I think short battle rooms are a very appealing option for some quick money. These are some fun stats, and I'm also going to talk about why a conclusion of the difference between short and the difference between short explorer and short battle in case you haven't gotten enough yet. So the resolve per minute is very interesting. We are talking about a 0.2 per minute, and short battle, I'm going to spoil a little bit, is actually, I believe, the highest among all dungeons. So short battle rooms will essentially get you the most resolve the quickest. So not only will it get you a high GPM, it gets you a high resolve, and it is very short. And also, you don't have to do as much damage, because remember, you had to take one whole extra fight in explored rooms. You only had to do about 4, maybe 3.5, which so be between 3 and 4 obviously fights for a battle, but you're almost consistently doing 4 to 5 in explored, and that can really add up on time, damage, stress, affliction, diseases, you name it. It just allows more opportunities for that. The accuracy is fairly comparable, but once again the damage is 120 less, which is pretty big, and the 0.82 per minute resolve compared to the short explorer 0.6 is just a very appealing option if you need to get people up quickly. If they're level 5, you want to throw them in a couple of times, get them up real quick. It's a great option if you have the weeks to do so. If it was up to me, I would definitely do a short battle over a short explored any day. If I was running low on money and I had to pick between a short explorer and a battle, the battle can get you more money, on the higher end, but we do need to look at the average and also the low end, and they're very comparable, but the low end of the short battle is much lower than the explorer, and if you cannot afford losing about 4,000 to 5,000 gold, you should really just do a short explorer. But in most other circumstances, if you want to gather money, get resolve, finish a dungeon quickly, make a week pass without doing a garbage week, I think a short battle room is perfect for you. Medium dungeon statistics. Medium dungeons are very interesting because we got 3 types, and all 3 of them have their weird stuff about them. But surprisingly, one definitely triumphs over the others, and as we go through the statistics, you're going to see which one does, but I don't want to ruin it yet, so yeah, watch the rest of this video and you get informed. Once again, I think it's very important to go over percent of tiles explored. I don't think this statistic can be underrated. It may not be something you think about, but it's very important and based on what you do. You're not really going to hit 100% tiles explored for a medium because you can always finish the room most likely before you explore all the rooms. Thus a high of 88%, but once again only a low 60%, which is not too far away from the average. Therefore, the average is 70%, so you're looking at about 35 out of 50 tiles. But we're going to go to the other dungeons. You're going to see that 70% is very comparable to the other two, and is actually not as bad on the high end. We're going to do battle and objective together because they're actually very comparable in the amount of tiles walked. As you can see, a 71% to a 75% on average, both ranging to 100%, but here's the thing about both, they both got a 43 and 48% for their lows. Therefore, you can almost finish these in half the room tiles being explored, which makes scouting very important once again. Statistically, they're not that much different, at least the battle and explored are. Objective, you're going to be walking a little longer possibly, but the high isn't as bad and the low isn't. So once again, it's more so of a gamble of the short explored against the short battle, because those often have less rooms as you'll see, and often don't have as many fights either, so the differences between those two actually aren't as bad. But if you can get just a consistent 70% rather than those 100%, you're going to see what that does to your times as we get there. So this section actually blew me away. I had a bias coming in. I was thinking the battles or objective would be the best, and my gosh was I very wrong about battle. Objective pretty comparable, but battle was probably the worst in time every time, and we're going to look through and maybe explain why. So first, the averages, the only ones that are close to each other are explored and objective. It's kind of like 12 to 13. It is about maybe a minute and a half. But once you get to the average of battle at 17.1 minutes, you're looking at, 17 minutes, a high of 21. And the crazy thing is, a high explored room is the average of battle rooms. That means a long, medium explore room, well not long, but a very difficult medium explore room where you gotta look over a lot of those tiles at 88% might only take you 17 minutes compared to the average 17 of battle. That is crazy. And what you might be thinking is, well, obviously battle rooms are just going to have buco bucks then. We're going to talk about that and see if that's actually true a little later. Now, the lows between explored and battle, very comparable. It's like 12 to 10.5, so it's a minute and a half to 2 minutes, but that's not nearly as big as a full 5 minutes and 4 minutes between the high and the average. And then we get to the oddball objective, where the high is 17, which is very familiar to obviously the explored, but once again the averages are fairly close. But it's that low chance right there, a low of 6.9. That's actually pretty significant, and we do need to look at that because that does matter in the end. Number of fights. Number of fights is very telling on why battle rooms take so friggin' long. And it's actually surprising how fast you can finish with the objective. And objective is just a little higher than explored, but that's probably why its average time was also just a little higher. So once again, the averages is only 5 for explored. That's almost the same as a short dungeon. So a short dungeon explorer has almost the same amount of fights as a medium explorer. You know what that means? That means you can do medium explorers in comparable amount of times compared to short dungeons. And if you do decide to put on the walking mod, you could even cut down on a little bit of that, making medium explorer dungeons almost the best thing possible. And we will look later at the other stats that medium explorer rooms can do for you. Only a high of 6 fights and low 4. Now I did have great scouting, and I will say that again. I was able to dodge a lot of fights sometimes and continue to hit my rooms. And we'll see why battle may not be the same way. Objective, very similar, high of 7, low of 4, average of 5.8. Not too much to dissect there. Once again, objectives did have you walking more tiles on average, thus you are probably going to run into another fight here and there, making that about a whole fight above explored. Now we get the battle, 7.4. It's almost 7.5, it's crazy. That's 2.5 cleared explorer, and that's 1.5 cleared of objective, a high of 9 fights. That's pretty crazy. And then we have a low of 6. So its lowest, the battle room's lowest, is the highest of the explored and almost the highest of objectives. Therefore, when you take a medium battle room, you're going to fight. And we're going to see what this does for your GPM and also what it does for your total gold collected for the dungeon. But before we go, we should look at the rooms. So we had 13 rooms all the time. All 5 had 13. I think as the dungeons got bigger, their numbers almost stayed more consistent than the lower, which was very interesting, I saw. Battle room had 10 rooms and objective had 12. Just something to keep in mind for when you need scouting and possible dungeon layouts. And even with the explored rooms having 3 more rooms, when you discover a secret room, it actually counts toward your rooms explored. And I didn't really know that when I was recording my statistics. I didn't add those in. But the explored rooms would technically have a higher amount. It'd be like 13.4 or 6. And you think that would actually hurt you. But what it does really is allow you to finish the dungeon quicker, because the secret rooms are often on the way to another room. Thus, you can finish it quicker. So this is what we want, the medium gold count. As you can see, yes, explored on average is technically lower than battle room. But if you go back, you're gonna really find out that the average GPM is gonna be sky high for medium explore, and it's actually gonna be kind of low for medium battle. Now the other thing about objective is the stats were very comparable for most of this video up until this point. I think what one of the key differences was I only got like 1 secret room for an objective. And that was it. If I could have, because for explored, we'll talk about this later, I believe I got 3 secret rooms. Battle I got only 1, and objective I got only 1. So that does make up a 10,000 gold difference, which is massive. Because imagine if I could add 10,000 to the high number there, that would be 32, which would be comparable to the other two, but I did not. But the numbers are the numbers, therefore we just do have to take them at face value. Objective rooms are the worst for gold, pretty much all around. There's no way to sugarcoat that. They do have the biggest chance of finishing early, but objectives may not be the best things to do sometimes. Now we get to pretty much the 2 titans in those categories, the battle and explored. On average, you're going to get more gold in a battle. You're going to get about a good 4,000 clear of the high, and it's only about 2,500 on the short. I mean, it's a pretty good number, but once you start getting to numbers this high, 2,500 gold isn't too much, but 4,000 is it's a pretty big sum. But I don't want to talk about this too much more, because I want to go look at the GPMs, and that's where the story is really going to tell you what happens. So this is where the story gets told. Explored room averages. Once again, objective rooms are they're not too good because they did take longer than explored, and they also took way less money than explored on average. Therefore, you have a very low GPM. The battle and objective both drop below 1,000, but on all of them, the lowest GPM is actually about 1,000. It's like 20 difference between all of them. So that's actually not too bad. Where we get to the biggest differences are obviously in the averages. It's a 300 difference between objective and battle, essentially. and then it's an almost a 500 difference between battle and explored. And remember what I said, I did find a lot more secret rooms in explored than I did the other two, which could inflate these stats, but the time it took to finish the dungeon of explored does not lie still and would still have a higher GPM in the end. The high GPM is about a 300 difference. It's not too much, but it's still decent, but it's really that 500 on average gold that's very important to look at. Now we're going to look right at the last stats here and kind of see what else is told in this story. So the resolve for explored mediums is 0.76, which is actually very comparable to the short battle, which is surprising, but not at the same time because you get way more resolve for a medium dungeon. And obviously it only took about 12 minutes when a short battle took like 5. So that extra amount of resolve you get for only about an extra 4 minutes is actually not too bad for your resolve numbers. Accuracies for all the rooms is very similar. Obviously battle is your weakest resolve, and objective is it's pretty comparable to explored, and if you get lucky your resolve can be through the roof if you finish the dungeon very early. And one last thing to look at, once again, objective and explored very similar on those 684 655. Battle rooms clear that by 300 almost. Pretty much 300 on both. That's a crazy amount of extra damage you have to do. That's a crazy amount of extra fights you have to go through. And you know everything that comes with fights. I don't need to reiterate that. It does eventually wear and tear on you. But if you do want to get your biggest pile of money, medium battle rooms are for you. But the biggest question about all of this is we can talk numbers all we want, but what the heck does this mean for our dungeons? Why should we pick a battle room over objective? If you want a high chance of finishing a room quickly, you should take an objective room. Obviously that has the best chance of finishing very quickly. If you want a consistent room, I would take explore. If you need to absolutely stockpile heirlooms or money, I would go with battle, because on average you're going to get a lot more money and the high is pretty good. If you want resolve, I think you're pretty good on explored and objective, and especially if you have high scouting, you can avoid some fights and help finish those dungeons much quicker than you can in battle rooms. Now these are some crazy numbers. So I mentioned about those explored rooms. Now we're going to talk about what happens if you took those out, and the numbers are actually pretty devastating from what we just saw. The average gold you get per dungeon from an explorer room is now only 19,685, and its GPM is only 1,656, and the average for battle rooms is still 26,936 with a GPM of 1,578. As you can see, those numbers become almost the exact same if you take away secret rooms. It's actually pretty crazy, and the explored rooms drop heavily in that average GPM. That's not comparable, but the GPM is very comparable. Therefore, if you still want a higher GPM, explored is your man, and also shorter dungeons. But if you don't get secret rooms, you're not actually going to gain all that much money compared to battle rooms. So if you want a massive heyday, go for battle rooms. And a fun stat, if you're wondering, well, what happens if you do it for objective? I actually didn't find any for objective, and objective doesn't look as bad now, though it's still worse than the other ones in your gold and money per minute. Long dungeons. Now, long dungeons, percent of tiles explored. Obviously, there's a lot of tiles, and within the description, I'm going to put some of the raw numbers here. And I'll eventually upload the data sheet with all of my raw numbers so you can eventually see, but as of now in the video, it's very comparable. These are almost like carbon copy numbers of each other. I swear I didn't mistype these. We have a low of 63% for explore, and we have a low of 64% for battle. It's only about a room difference or two, and maybe about 8 pathway tiles. High of 88% battle to explored 87%, almost the same. An average of 74 to 78, almost the same. So these aren't telling us too much of a difference. Therefore, we're going to kind of skip ahead to other stats to see where they really do start becoming different. But once again, the amount of time, because it's about the same amount of tiles, actually aren't too much different from each other. A battle room of low of 20.5 to a low of 22 minutes, it's a minute and a half difference. The highs are exactly the same, rocking a 31.5 minutes, and then the average is only about a difference between explored and battle. So we need to keep going further to see where these two try to separate from one another. And I'm going to argue even the number of fights, it's not too much difference, because 10.6 could reliably round up to an 11, and now you have 11 to 12 for an average. You have a high of 13 to a high of 14, and actually explored had a low of 9 compared to the low of 8 for a battle. So these are very comparable, even the amount of fights you take. So therefore, if you have about the same amount of time, you have the same amount of rooms explored, the same amount of fights, most of these stats are going to look rather the same. And you're thinking, holy crap, long explorers have an average of 18 and battle rooms have an average of 13. They still take about the same amount of time. Yeah, I mean, the fights are spread out more in those rooms, so it's just quicker walking, while in battle you just kind of take them in a row, and the walking difference really isn't too bad. And as you can see, even the numbers aren't incredibly different. We are talking about 15 gold difference on average. 15. Now when you do get to the high end, it's 5,000 favor in battle, which is pretty good. And it's only about 3,000 on the low end, which isn't, I mean, it's decent, but it's not the end of the world. I would say 5 grand is. But I mean, look at those averages. That's crazy. Literally 15. That's an insane amount of gold to get down to. What's that to expect? No, once again, they're just not that different. An average of 1,209 to 1,174. A high of 1405 to a high of 1351, and then the lows are actually the biggest difference. That might be somewhat significant, but in the end it's really not that big of a difference. And then we get to the end here. As you can see, the results: 0.46 for Explorer, 0.44 for Battle, 94% accuracy, and an extra 300 in the battle because you do take about an extra fight and a half. Therefore, at the end of the day, it really depends on whether you just want to take an extra fight or two, maybe take an extra minute and a half to do battle. If you like Explore, go to Explore. We will go into some other small numbers. I have fun miscellaneous numbers, and we also explore rooms after this. I felt like short and medium had the most variance, obviously, and once we got to long, they were just long. It was just interesting to see how undifferent they were from each other, because I never knew which one I wanted to do more. I thought battle was quicker. It wasn't. Explore technically is, but they are about the same, and that's why I could see why I thought one was definitely quicker than the other.